So let me say how delighted I am to host this talk today with Professor Konstantin Psimopoulos from Harvard, or Professor Psy, as he is known by his friends and students. Of course, the name Psimopoulos is a very difficult Greek name. It starts with this complex onset. Okay, so Konstantin holds the degrees from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, which also happens to be my alma mater, Springfield College, the Ohio State University, Harvard Medical School, and the Stritch School of Medicine at Loyola here in Chicago. Konstantin serves as Senior Program Director and faculty member at Harvard's Initial on Health, Spirituality, and Religion, and is affiliated with the Human Flourishing Program, the Center of Bioethics, and the Departments of Global Health and Social Medicine at the Harvard Medical School, and Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. His scholarly interests lie at the intersection of bioethics, theology, and emerging technologies, and he has particular focus on theological bioethics, artificial intelligence, spirituality, and healing in medicine, as well as public health ethics. At Harvard, he co-teaches classes on religion, well-being, and public health. And at Hellenic College Holy Cross, he teaches Orthodox Christian ethics and social ministries. Konstantin has authored many book chapters, and most recently one for Springer Nature, and he has many peer-reviewed publications in journals and presentations at international conferences. He serves as the director of the Division of Bioethics of the Orthodox Academy of Crete, under the auspices of the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Constantinople, the city that has his name, after another prominent Constantine in history. And as he's also an invited member to the inaugural National Committee on Artificial Intelligence and Theology of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. Konstantin is the recipient also of many awards, such as the National Award by Shape America, the HMS Dean Scholarship, the International Emerging Scholar Award, and Teaching Excellence Awards. Recently, he was nominated for the International Expanded Reason Award from the Vatican Foundation, Joseph Ratzinger and Benedict XVI. The aim of this prestigious award is to recognize and promote university work that serves the truth and aspires to the advancement of man, of human, and society. So I'll stop here. Many are your distinctions and achievements. So we're very pleased to have such a distinguished scholar among us. Let's all welcome Konstantin. We'll talk today about bioethics and dialogos. We're going to find out more about this in medicine and religion for human flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Anastasia. Thank you all for coming. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully they can hear okay from there. I will not come too close. But after such a wonderful introduction, as I remember, my father was a student at New York University in the late 60s. It was in the crowd when someone like Anastasia was gracious and kind to give, an amazing introduction. And when he himself came up to the podium, he said, after such a wonderful introduction, I can't wait to hear myself talk. So I will also start with that, because I'm also very excited to be here and with the things that hopefully will be meaningful and relevant. I will also recognize my new friend and colleague, John Yoon, but I have a slide later for that as well. But the program on medicine and religion, that is like a sister program to our initiative at Harvard. And essentially, so you heard, the title, the Bioethics and Dialogos. So we have the AI as in dialogos, or dialogue with us, in medicine and religion, but for human flourishing. And I have a thank you to John Yoon here on this slide. But I wanted to tell you that I have these different appointments at Harvard and also at the Hellenic College Holy Cross that really inform what I do and how I teach. And I always start with something that is most meaningful to me as a quote, and that is from my late professor, big mentor, Paul Farmer. Some of you have known. Let me see a show of hands for those here. Who has heard or have known of Paul Farmer's work? Okay, so at least a couple, which is wonderful. And that he, among many other things, he said that the idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that is wrong with the world. So through this, I'm going to start this exploration, essentially, into many questions that I'm sure people from across the social sciences, the humanities, medical sciences, and public health are really grappling with in our day and age. So one question is, should explorations in and around bioethics focus more on human flourishing? And if so, why? How do we define sometimes? So I will show you in the next slide the agenda for today. But also questions such as, how can the principle of non-maleficence, as we have it in bioethics, and I have another friend, a Greek from the Center of Bioethics here, that is the McLean Center for Ethics, Christos Lazaridis, that we talk about all those principles all the time, and non-maleficence being central to the practice of medicine as well, coming from one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, Hippocrates, right, from the island of Kos, who in Latin said primum non nocere, which is at least first do no harm. But these are not meaningful for only doctors and scientists in medicine and public health, but also theologians and chaplains and those in spiritual care, and definitely philosophers who are interested in religion, and the opposite, theologians who are interested in health. The central question being, can and should we address issues of social justice and health equity, and what we mean by the logos with an uppercase lambda, as we say in Greek, or L, as the word of God. So today I'm going to take you on a little journey into what is human flourishing, at least as we define it and measure it at Harvard, what is bioethics, and then what is the connection between spirituality, health, and religion, and more specifically, after we establish this, what is the logos of AI? And logos has multiple explanations, as you will see as well. How can we ensure that character, virtue, and phronesis, and we have a wonderful Jeannie from the Practical Wisdom, or otherwise Phronesis Project, remains central to the dialogos with AI. So it's as if we are in dialogue with AI, as we are asking the LLMs, generative AI, and in the future, super intelligent AI, to talk to us back or answer to us and give us responses. But in a way, are we doing that in a way that is not just ethically important, but really profoundly tied to what it means to be human and to live within a flourishing community? So we're going to try to do all that in dialogues with AI, and with a goal to measure, essentially, how can AI promote human flourishing, which should be both bioethically and theologically appropriate. All right, so with this introduction, we're going into human flourishing. This is our program at Harvard. It falls under the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, FAS, and this is a nice, who has been to Harvard's campus? Let's see, I'll make it into a class as well, since it's a lunch talk. Great. Anyone recognizes this part of campus by any chance? This is a little bit more tricky, and especially to the right, there is, and I have my clicker, by the way, I can use that too. To the right, we have, let's see, I'll show you. I cannot show very well, but to the right, we have a chapel, which is the second chapel on campus. And our program is essentially under the Institute for Quantitative Social Science. However, most of us have appointments at the School of Public Health, the Chan School of Public Health, others in the School of Education, and then as well as the medical school. So what is human flourishing? Anyone knows? Probably you do, or at least in some ways, but what my friend Aristotle would say would be eudaimonia or evdaimonia in Greek. And I will tell you more about that, of course. My colleague and great, scholar in many scientists, Tyler Vandervelde, has defined it as the state in which all aspects of an individual's life are good. And how do we measure that? We have 6 main measures. One is happiness and life satisfaction. Second one is mental and physical health. Third and fourth are my favorite, and I'm biased, hopefully in a good way towards this, meaning and purpose in life, and character and virtue. 5, close social relationships, and 6, financial and material stability. So it's really integrative, as you see below within the heading. So integrating knowledge across disciplines, theology, philosophy, biostatistics, public health, medicine, education, and the law. And we do have an app that, by the way, both you in the on Zoom, so you can also scan this QR code, and you can actually try to check and measure your own flourishing. And later on, those measures that I mentioned, and you can see measures for gratitude, character, strengths, meaning measure, and the overall flourishing measure. And the idea is to flourish together, like the prom. Let's flourish together. People can try the exercises that we have, but I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I want to give you at least an introduction on what those 6 domains that we also have the measures for are, especially because later on I will transition into using those for AI in human flourishing. So happiness and life satisfaction, one more time, mental and physical health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, financial and material stability. In the next few days, actually next Wednesday, less than a week now, we're going to publish for the first time nationally and internationally the first results after the 6-year phase, the first phase of a longitudinal study that is global in scope. And the motto here is mapping the mystery of humanity, which is a great challenge. So currently we actually have China in wave 2, so there are 210,000 participants. This is the first time ever that we're doing this at such scope. This is a collaboration with Baylor University, as well as the Center for Open Science, with support mainly from the Templeton Foundation. And next week in DC, the global headquarters for the Gallup Foundation, we're going to present this special collection of about 100 scientific studies that came out of this first longitudinal study phase. And they will be published primarily in Nature and Springer. So anyone who may be in DC, you're welcome to join us, but there will be a virtual option as well. Now, moving on into theology, spirituality, and health, before we go into the laws of AI. This is a recent publication by Tyler, The Theology of Health. And this is the first time, although he's a Catholic, a Roman Catholic, it's the first time that he's publishing a book on something theological per se, although there is a lot of theological and spiritual motivation for a lot of his work and that of the Human Flourishing Program, but it is not the main purpose of the program itself. It is of the initiative that I will show you in a little bit. So theology, health, medicine, and human flourishing are connected. And actually, this book was based on the first and only other publication as a book, in a book format, that was done by a philosopher and theologian who converted to Orthodoxy. He was Catholic who converted to Orthodoxy, very famous from Europe by the name of Jean-Claude Larset. So that his book was The Theology of Illness. But Tyler wanted to focus more on health, especially broadly conceived. Now, is there such a thing, you might wonder, especially some folks in the room who might be students here at the University of Chicago, as hesychastic prayer, καρδιακή προσευχή, as science at Harvard. And yes, there is a new project from a lab on neurospirituality that is actually doing a controlled trial. It's not a fully randomized controlled trial, but it's a controlled trial using hesychastic prayer as the treatment or the dose, in a sense, in a very systematic control way. And then on the other hand, the control group is meditation, which is sterilized in a way. It is not specifically theologically or spiritually focused, as we would find in Buddhism practices. So, and I will show you the first part of a clip, a video clip that is actually part of this 6-day, which then becomes a 6-week-long course. There are many sessions, and there's a way to assess as well. So let's, oops.
Welcome to the practice of hesychastic prayer, also known as the prayer of the heart, or more simply, the Jesus prayer. This is an ancient prayer practice. It goes all the way back to the origins of Christianity. The intention of hesychastic prayer is to fully unite the human soul with God. I'll say that one more time, that the intention of hesychastic prayer is ultimately to fully unite the human soul with God. The word hesychastic simply comes from the Greek word for quiet. By practicing this prayer, you'll cultivate a quiet stillness in your heart. Both scripture and the living tradition teach us that God speaks to us in the quiet of our heart. As such, when our heart is calm and centered on Jesus, we become more sensitive to God's voice and are prepared to receive a peace which is described as passing all our understanding. In this recording, I'm going to briefly speak about the history and meaning of hesychastic prayer so that you can have a basic understanding of the origins of the practice.
And if you want to find out more, there is about 6 more minutes. You can actually find it on this website. I will show you as well in the next slide, which is called Prayer Science. So it's actually about spiritual therapeutics, along with Mass General Hospital, which is one of our 14 teaching affiliates of Harvard Medical School. And this is, what the students or the participants see. Now, moving into our initiative on health, spirituality, and religion, which is a sister initiative to what Dr. John Yoon has here, you have here at the University of Chicago, program on medicine and religion. There was a student-led video that a student of ours did. And I will play again the first part of that video so that you can see some of our research from the center, which I will also show you in some of the other slides. So Ellie did this short movie. And it highlights some of our own research. This is from a JAMA paper, Journal of American Medical Association.
My name is Radhika. I grew up in a pretty Indian Hindu family. I had surgery this past summer, and it was a really big deal for me because it was a kind of invasive surgery that involved taking something out of my body. And I feel like in Western medicine, it's just normalized. Like if there's something wrong with your body, the answer is, oh, surgery, take it out. But I feel like in Eastern philosophies or even other philosophies, it's really almost sometimes frowned upon to open up the body because that's it's really invasive. It's not a normal or natural thing to do. And I feel like that was something that I really struggled with when I went to these consultations or even talked about it with other people, because from a spiritual sense, it just didn't make sense to do that kind of care. And I feel like those things aren't talked about in healthcare. I remember talking through my decision of getting surgery with my therapist. And my therapist is trained in Western medicine, but practices Buddhism herself. So she just takes from both Western medicine and Eastern philosophy in her practice. It helped me be at ease with my decision. It's also helped me understand my body more a little bit afterwards. but it definitely wasn't a conversation I had with like my primary care doctor or my surgeon.
And just so you one more part of this, the next clip.
My name is Sophia. I hope to become a physician assistant in the medical field. I've worked at both Mass General Hospital and Boston Children's Hospital. In my classes, I've never been given a step-by-step how to approach a certain religion. I've been told time and time again that it can get inappropriate very easily. There's a very fine line. I think there is a time limitation with it. I think obviously, with my experience, you only see people for a couple hours, and so you aren't able to kind of foster that relationship. I think when you are to approach a subject such as religion, where things can get really personal and really heavy at times, I think it's important to kind of establish that patient-provider trust before you're able to approach that together.
I know we have someone who is very familiar with chaplaincy, John Yoon here in the room.
My name is Julia. I am a pre-medical student. I've had some experience working in hospitals of various kinds, and inpatient, outpatient, and I grew up Roman Catholic. I don't think as a healthcare provider in any level, you're given adequate training to deal with this like spiritual, emotional aspect of healthcare. It's all very hard science, and none of it really pertains to the well-being and like the overall mental state of the patient. I also feel like religion is something where it is so different on an individual level. Growing up Roman Catholic, I just remember a lot of my mindset being like, something bad happens to me, it's my fault. Like, I caused this to happen. I did whatever sin, which probably at age 12 was like fighting with my brother. I fought with my brother and it caused this bad thing to happen. So I feel like my associations would be like, okay, I'm sick. Must have done something to deserve this. And I don't really see seeking like a higher religious person. I feel like I don't see the benefit from that for myself personally.
And so hence the distinction that Tyler wanted to draw from theology of illness, where of course, this is something negative, towards theology of health and human affairs. You have me, so you don't need to see me. You have me in live, and even for the virtual audience, I'm here. So now we're moving into bioethics. And again, I do promise we will get to AI, but I wanted to establish some of the things that come together and are really interrelated. So bioethics, as some of you will know very well, others not so well, but it does draw from many of the original fields of humanities of any university, essentially. So my own is a little bit older, it's from 1636, right? Harvard was established almost 4 centuries ago, and the 3 main departments, very close to our Widener library, as usually is the classics, languages, literatures, philosophy, and then a little bit further theology. And this is how it had been for centuries in the preliminary way of having a liberal arts education, focused primarily actually on philosophy and theology. But now we have the law and anthropology and social sciences, and this informs what we do and talk about and how we practice bioethics in medicine and public health, but not only for the clinical or medical dimension. The real question, the central question we're trying to answer within bioethics is, what is the morally appropriate course of action? And those are decisions that around matters of life or death. And so this is not my own advertisement, but it was part of attracting more students, and it happens that it has my profile here and my good friend Samuel next to me. And who are bioethicists? Bioethicists are chaplains at hospitals who are part of ethics committees, theologians, medical doctors, of course, MDs, other doctors, not that doctor, right? Not that kind of doctor, PhDs in many fields, lawyers, attorneys, folks in government, health departments, philosophers, healthcare professionals more broadly conceived, but especially also that is something that connects now to AI, those in the biomedical sciences and in biotechnology, those in genetics and genomics. Many of my students for our bioethics course at the medical school are those who are in the MD PhD programs. And I will show you one of those PhD programs that we have developed recently. So this is bioethics, and the Bible, put it in quotes, for bioethics has always been, at least since the late 70s, that of Tom Beecham's and Jim Childress's book on principles on biomedical ethics. Actually, one of the founders also for bioethics as a field that is almost contemporary, maybe a little bit younger, was the founder of the program on medicine and religion, or at least one of them, Denzel Macy. Many of you may have known or know of him. And so recently, Tom Beecham passed away at the age of 87. And there was a wonderful celebration of his life that I attended. So these two folks developed, after the Belmont report, that was a government commission study in the mid-70s, those that are now known as the 4 main bioethical principles. The respect for autonomy, that of non-maleficence that I mentioned, a norm of avoiding the causation of harm, beneficence, which should be the most positive focus, how to do good, relieving, lessening, preventing harm, and providing benefits, and balancing benefits against risks and costs. And finally, but often not so much central, unfortunately, to many conversations, that of justice, but justice broadly construed, as well as with an emphasis on social justice and health equity. A group of norms for fairly distributing benefits. This is mostly a superficial level of distributing justice just in medical and clinical ethics, as well as public health. But I'll show you that it's much more than that. Now, looking just for a little bit on the principle of respect, and this is connected to issues that have to do with AI and privacy, for example, autonomous decisions, but also in clinical trials, that of informed consent. This is very central, but it should not be the priority, the ones that we prioritize or seen in a hierarchical order, right? There has been too much focus on the atomization of American and Western societies. And actually, Beecham and Childress, in their last 8th edition, have their own criticism on how much weightier, as we say in the language of bioethics, so more weight on this principle has been attributed to override all others, but that, again, should not always be the case. And respect has attenuated, as some colleagues from the School of Theology at Loyola, who are theologians and bioethicists like Therese Lysot, have said that the principle of respect has attenuated. So it is not as heavy towards respecting the person, and it has been more respecting the decision of anyone, regardless of who he or she or they are. So non-maleficence, some very, very basic, specific rules: do not kill, do not incapacitate, do not cause, that may have a resemblance from the Old Testament as well. These are what we call prima facie or prima facie duties. So not absolute, but intuitive, that make intuitive sense. And beneficence, you can see more. So think of the Good Samaritan, the parables specifically, or singers, something very, very secular, the most good you can do, effective altruism, Peter Singer's work from Princeton. And one of your own here at the University of Chicago, it used to be our own over at Harvard, Martha Nussbaum, and her mentor, Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who actually developed the capabilities theory for justice, which is one of my personal favorites. And it applies to human flourishing, and now we're going to go into the next parts of the talk. And it says, to each person, the means necessary for the exercise of capabilities essential for a flourishing life. And if you look at the word cloud, this is something that we did with students at the medical school, you will see that some of those issues in bioethics have to do with health equity and justice, and then many, many other things, of course. And so with that, we are trying to expand the field of bioethics. And as our new, still relatively new, a year ago, is when the new president of the Hastings Center which was predominantly the first and most prestigious biomedical ethics center, Vardit Ravitsky would say, bioethics should be seen as human flourishing. So I'm using a lot of that, but also of the work of Paul Farmer that I mentioned, who was the Kolokotronis professor at Harvard, although he had nothing to do with Greece or that Kolokotronis, but it was a big donation, which of course is important to have great work at an institution, from some of the descendants. Actually, in this case, a graduate from Harvard Business School, Ted Kolokotronis, like Theodore Kolokotronis, Anastasia knows very well, and of course, my wife Calliope. I didn't mention that Calliope is my wife, who I'm very happy to be here with. And so that was a Kolokotronis professor. And there is a new book from Terry Slice at the Loyola University Chicago, a little bit up the street, on Paul Farmer's work as the theological ethics and his own praxis. And in this front page, it has Greek Anargyros Pavlos, but it also has the hymn, Paul Farmer, that is, holding the Good Samaritan as if he is a saint minus the halo. So this is a little bit of a memorial for him. And this quote, again, I think is central because it connects to what I want to focus on, which is inspired by another famous theologian from a school that doesn't have to be mentioned necessarily, but it
He was here too.
Okay, then that school will not be mentioned, but he was here too. I know James Gustafson. That I love this quote. We have to see ourselves making the transcendence between what a human being is to what being human ought to be. And so with that, I'm moving into, and I know, let's see, we have time. I'm moving into what we do at our initiative briefly, and then how AI can be seen as human flourishing after that. So this is an inter-faculty initiative at Harvard under the Human Flourishing Program. Those are my colleagues. We have the former Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, Howard Koh. He was under the Obama administration. We have Tyler that you can see up there, and the two Balbonis that actually are colleagues of John's over here. So in our initiative, Divinity School at Harvard Medical and Public Health, we have noticed that there was a need, hence also the program here, of a sizable gap between what patients want and need in the realms of religion and spirituality and versus what our current healthcare system offers. So that essentially has been marginalizing religion from the domain of public health policy and essentially ignored the central role that spirituality holds within the experience of physical suffering and terminal illness primarily. And you saw a little bit of that in the testimony from the video from the students. So if we neglect the fundamental dimension of human experience, this will result and does result in a cascading impact on public health policy, patients' well-being, medical decisions, and the healthcare system. So we have this interfaculty integrated initiative, and the central question we're trying to answer in our initiative is how may religion and spirituality, in concert with public health and the practice of medicine, can alleviate illness and promote human well-being or human flourishing. And I will show you two ways in which we can do that. One with AI in healthcare, and then AI measured for human flourishing. These are just some of the headlines that we have had recently. And we have a big project on forgiveness as well that has taken a lot of publicity too. All right, so this is an AI, as the first ones I should have mentioned, generated image with prompts that I gave it. And I've used also the DALL-E 3, which is a software. And how does this work? Now, thanks to Anastasia here, she shared with me a wonderful paper that they published last year entitled The Human and the Mechanical, Logos, Truthfulness, and ChatGPT. So within that paper, by none other than MIT Press, having a reference from an MIT Press, The Promise of Artificial Intelligence by Smith, we see that essentially it is, and I'm going to the second bullet here, it's supposed to be deliberative thought grounded in ethical commitment and responsible action. But actually, AI's ability is not that exactly. It is reckoning. And most LLMs, most large language models, they actually produce text and recognize patterns and then predict what comes next. But they do not actually have this human quality judgment. So thank you, Anastasia, for that, because that actually helped me as I was preparing this lecture that I have been working on for a while. So what is then the logos of AI? And logos has multiple meanings, as I alluded to earlier. It's both the feature of the human mind responsible for both language and rational thought, so logic and moral reasoning. And we know from some of my colleagues at the rhetoric department at MIT that talk about those three appeals: ethos, logos, pathos, another set of three wonderful Greek words. And I know that for the folks in linguistics specifically, but also in classics and modern literature, these have the significance of the etymology, but also the continuity. And I'm sorry that I neglected of mentioning Jason, who is the provost here, the vice provost at the university, who is also in linguistics, of course, and happens to have this wonderful privilege that we share of having wonderful women who are also wives who are both professors here, like mine, Calliope, yours, Anastasia. So this is a wonderful privilege to have. So the conceptual causal prerequisite for human thinking and moral and social flourishing is what we mean by logos. But logos is, of course, the word of God in Jesus Christ himself. Again, that logos with the uppercase L or lambda, right? So what ChatGPT and other forms now have, ChatGPT 4.5, by the way, which is the most up-to-date, by design, they are unlimited in what they can memorize, i.e. learn. But the question is, are they capable of distinguishing the possible from the impossible, given the prompts that we have? And the answer is no, or at least not yet. So AI does not have a mind of its own in the sense of a human mind. Because of three main reasons. It lacks logos with a lowercase l, reasoning of its own. It lacks logos or some more theological, spiritual element that can do good, essentially. And of course, through that, it lacks character of its own, virtue, and phronesis, that is known as practical wisdom. Now, we have some wonderful people who are in Boston at MIT. One of them is a very famous, at least very famous person and personality in Greece, but he is very famous as a scholar throughout the world. And that's the guy next to me in the middle, Kostis. He also has the same name as I, Kosti. That's Kalakis, who is famous for breaking the problem of Nasis equilibria, as you may have heard, which became a movie, by the way, not his thesis, but Nasis equilibria became a movie of a wonderful mind, a beautiful mind, starring Russell Crowe. Thank you. So we wanted to ask the computer scientists who work on AI, leading scholars at MIT, and conveniently, two of them are friends. The other is Professor Manolis Kellis with his AI for medicine and computational biology. But I want to ask from the experts, is AI playing God? And hence now the more theological and religious focus on AI. And more recently, just 2 days ago, actually a month ago, we were at the Media Lab at MIT with a group of theologians, philosophers, people from government, computer scientists, and others, asking, what will we become with AI? Which are questions that are being asked from Silicon Valley through, in the White House, and I was in one of those conversations recently at the White House, as well as our own Silicon Valley in Kendall Square, MIT. And very recently, just 2 days ago, we had a similar one, and my wife and I were there, Calliope, on the question was, are we doing AI right? So those questions are not usually asked when people are developing AI per se. So if we take the assumption that we have been, and the belief that we have, at least in my own case as an Orthodox Christian, that we are made in the image and likeness of God, then I argue that technology, therefore AI specifically, is created in the image and likeness of humans. And this actually connects to both how we do science and how we seek to understand God through theology. And I have the English version and the Greek. I will show you both. This is from a new publication on the social ethos of the Orthodox Church. The desire for scientific knowledge flows from the same wellspring as faith's longing to enter ever more deeply into the mystery of God. And now I'll show you exactly the same but with the Greek, because I think it's important in a Center for Hellenic Studies talk to use the Greek, the beautiful language that we have. Η επιθυμία για επιστημονική γνώση απορρέει από την ίδια πηγή με αυτή της λαχτάρας της πίστης να εισέλθει ακόμα βαθύτερα στο μυστήριο του Θεού. And Kosti Daskalakis, Professor Daskalakis from MIT himself said that AI is as good as and ethical as its algorithm. And many of you know that already, but this is really key because on one hand, it can mislead if it is fed with ambiguous, biased, incomplete, and unreliable information to feed those LLMs, right? That's how it works. And on the other hand, it can also mislead in virtue of the fallacies of the algorithms that it relies upon. So in other words, we can create AI in the best of what a human is and has to offer. And as we read also from this document called Flow, humanity's power to transform physical reality for both good and ill is quite unprecedented in human history. We know that. But of course, we have the responsibility to face some of the perils. And it does draw from every dimension of cosmic existence, adopting data points and training in its algorithms that we decide to use or embed in them. Of course, that comes with all our conscious and unconscious biases, right? So after all, equitable, free of bias, legitimate and necessary scientific research is indeed what we should be doing on one hand, but it's also part of what Flow, this document, describes as the Christian's mission, not limited again to the Orthodox tradition, the Christian's mission to transfigure the world in the light of God's kingdom. So in this context, we see AI in its advancement, that it reaches out to all creation, all of life, to every dimension of cosmic existence. All right, but can it heal the world? So we're going to look into now how it works in medicine and healthcare. And I'll have some suggestions. So I have about 5 minutes. Okay. And we can have some discussion, I would imagine, if people can stay. All right. We have a new AI in medicine PhD track. These are some of the students that I teach to this course on responsible conduct of science or bioethics, especially those who are pursuing both the MD and PhD. But there is an donation. It's good, again, to have donations in many institutions, not just some, from people who are proud graduates or alumni, but also those who want to see the scientists, you, theologians, medical doctors, public health professionals alike, do this work, right? And linguistics and the social sciences, of course. So we have one tool. I want to just focus on, there are many, as you can see, transforming the way we discover new drugs from existing drugs, but with billions of combinations of those existing drugs for especially rare diseases, like the one you see on the bottom right. And we have, across the board, heart-saving AI, Alzheimer's disease, you name it, essentially. This is everything that we do at the medical school in what we call the Foundation for Therapeutic Science. And you can see a quote by our own Dean George Daly, that what should the physician of the future be doing in terms of his or her own training now? Now, here is one thing I want to just read for a quick moment. So there is something that is providing accurate molecular diagnosis, which details DNA alterations in a cell, so it's a cellular level, during surgery, so live during surgery. It can help a neurosurgeon decide how much brain tissue to remove exactly, because removing too much when the tumor is less aggressive can affect a patient's neurological and cognitive function later on. Likewise, if we remove too little when the tumor is highly aggressive, it may leave behind malignant tissue that can grow and spread quickly. And we can see that in the informed consent process using AI now for clinical trials. There is a project I'm embarking on with commissioned by Regeneron, big pharmaceutical company, on using ChatGPT to facilitate this informed consent that connects to the bioethics principles, and many others. And finally, how do we do AI and human flourishing? How do we measure that? We have a number of different objectives from our project, but I will not highlight any of this, but I will show you one towards the end. We have a plan for the next 5 years. Rejecting AI determinism is a big part that affects the humanities specifically. Cross-disciplinary, of course, collaboration that I mentioned. And we're actually going towards year 2 now, engaging industry and policy action. And I will show you just one element that we have done, which is white papers. And one of the recent ones we submitted to the National Science Foundation, and that's the paper that we talked about at the White House, measuring what matters. Metrics for aligning AI policy with human flourishing, which is currently very apparently central to what the Office of Science and Technology Policy with our Greek-American friend Michael Kratsios is doing right now. So this looks like what follows. At the heart of designing AI for human flourishing lies the distinction between instrumental and intrinsic value that is deep into what we do in bioethics. And just briefly, those first 2 bullets, instrumental value comes from the things we do as means to other ends. Tasks we want to complete efficiently or delegate. Intrinsic value emerges from experiences valuable in themselves, activities we want to linger on or do for their own sake. So, in a balanced approach, AI can become a powerful tool that automates routine tasks while freeing our time. So we know that from those who use ChatGPT and others. However, we sometimes are not able to see if we can flourish through that. And that's what I'm going to leave you with. So there are 6 ways to do that and measure it, applying our measures from the Human Flourishing Program into AI. And you can see that for each one, and we talked about AI in healthcare, but for meaning and purpose and character and virtue, these are the 2 central ones. AI systems can either support or undermine human creativity and a sense of contribution to society. And 3, character and virtue, AI-mediated interactions can influence moral development, and that's what we hopefully should have as our own telos from a teleological standpoint, but also an eschatological standpoints. 5 is financial stability, and 6 is happiness, which is the most important element for human flourishing through AI. And I'm saying that as a Christian bioethicist, so we can actually illustrate, and the humanities and social sciences connect collectively and collaboratively to those who are designing the next iterations of the ChatGPT or AI tools that we use, so that we can move just beyond just what is safety or risk mitigation, and also look into social justice. This is a paper from Catholic Social Teaching and AI in healthcare, but also things that matter. For example, the Archdiocese has a group of America, the Greek Orthodox, and recently there was a publication on what we're discussing there, which actually matters for a social ethos of human flourishing. And I will leave you with, these are some principles that we have from the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine. And I will leave you with this. This is my second final slide. So technology at its best is a tool crafted and deployed by human beings for human beings. However, modern digital and AI-driven technologies are often accepted as autonomous forces shaping society according to their own internal logic, independent of human values, norms, and ethical consideration, which is a mistaken assumption. But it's entertained by both the tech optimists and the tech pessimists, and ignores the fundamental truth that technology is truly deeply embedded in human context, and it must remain subordinate to human values and purposes rather than dictating its own trajectory. So I'm going to alter a little bit, if I may, Gustafson's quote from what you can see here into what I would recommend, that we have to see ourselves making the transcendence between what a human being is with AI to what being human ought to be with AI, because bioethics and the humanities and AI can lead to human flourishing. Thank you so much. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you very much, Kosti. This was, multidimensional, as we can very accurately say. We touched upon a lot of very important questions. And, again, people working in philosophy, in the humanities, like we're engaged in this type of questions. But I also welcome my colleagues from the medical school, to give us more like their input and their thoughts on what we heard today. Yes.
I have a question, not to put you on the spot, and I don't know how, you mentioned early on in your presentation, the prayer versus the psychoanalytic meditation research. I don't know if you have results from that yet. If not, could you talk?
Not yet.
Could you talk a little bit about, I guess, how you operationalize some of your outcome measures and the design of the research?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This is a new project that we have just started with some of the colleagues from the Human Flourishing Project and our neurologist friend from Mass General. But essentially, what the design had is to, and I wasn't involved in the design process, but from what I gather is that we wanted to have something that could be used as treatment, essentially. So it's like a specific dosage. So you get this dosage, which is engaging in how to pray according to the Hesti prayer, and doing it with a specific guidance every day in the beginning of the day. And then we have 3 survey points as along the way. So there was a first survey in the beginning, there was one halfway, and then there was one survey to draw from the participants from a variety of things that appear to have importance in their lives outside of this exercise or prayer, and how this might be helping them with their own understanding of meaning and purpose and character in life through this ancient practice. So that was essentially what went into the design, and we wanted to not randomly assign, so there wasn't a random assignment, because it wouldn't have been ecologically valid. We wouldn't be able to have a Muslim, for example, do a prayer that mentions Jesus Christ all the time. It wouldn't be ecologically valid. So that's why we didn't do the random assignment. So, well, thank you.
Michael Ishwale, fellow Christian ethicist and at the Lumen Christi Institute in the neighborhood. At a recent event that I organized, we had Rick Stevens from Argonne here, and he presented a stark statement that if you are not, that basically in the future, all doctoral students in the sciences will be at a disadvantage if they don't come to gain mastery over AI, because it's increasingly going to be what distinguishes you from other candidates in terms of being accepted into programs. To what degree do you think people within the humanities, within here, the Divinity School, also need to, perhaps not at the level of coding, but maybe at the level of what I've come to understand is vibe coding, like gain greater facility over the tool of artificial intelligence, so as to be able to better make judgments within our sort of social sphere about what is the AI?
Thank you for the question. Also, thank you for coming. And I know from John Yoon that the Lumen Christi, is something wonderful that you have here. So to your question specifically, I think first of all, it is just one additional thing that we inadvertently have to become more and more sort of, or at least pseudo experts in, as you said, so maybe not the coding part, but actually asking our friends who do that to let us know, first of all, how it works exactly, so we can better understand. So superficial level, at a rudimentary level, to have this knowledge, how does it work? Like, from the ABCs, like the alphabet. But also, try to have that as a challenge for anyone in the humanities to go beyond our immediate expertise, which I think is always the focus of some interdisciplinary work. And for the technology itself, it's as if, it's like, a PowerPoint presentation. Everyone at some point, at any level, especially, going from undergraduate to graduate school, and then, the faculty and beyond in scholarship, had to learn how to use some technology, not actually just know what it is, but use it. So I think if you cannot do this at least at some level to have the understanding, then if you have the luxury to be a professor, at least have your graduate students learn that well and help you do it. That I would say can also work. And I have I'm supervising 2 master's theses on AI in bioethics, one is looking into chaplaincy, and the other is looking into healthcare specifically. So I think, sometimes it's a good opportunity to also learn from others while you're doing it together. But I think it's definitely going to be an advantage in the future to at least know as much as you can, and then find the area that is more meaningful to your own work at large. Yeah. So I don't know if that's answering the question, but I think that there is potential to try to learn new things and also try to apply that to the degree that it can be, again, meaningful for our human flourishing.
Yes.
Costa, very nice talk, very broad. I have this question. You presented things. I think you said, maybe I want to see if I understood well, but you're saying AI is a tool, and it has very great advantages potentially, and we can learn to use it and incorporate it in a way that we flourish. And so I wonder though, what do you think about this idea that the tool eventually will become an agent? Or the idea that these LLMs, I don't know, some people have argued that in the next decade we will have potentially LLMs that have some degree of rudimentary potential consciousness, right? So they could be considered agents. So I guess my question is, should we think about guardrails to prevent that from happening? And if we cannot do that, how should we treat those new types of agents?
Yeah, thank you, Christo, and also thank you for coming from the McLean Center for Ethics, our colleagues in bioethics there. I would say that something that was repeated actually at MIT in our conversation the other night, 2 days ago, where it was said that the way we treat AI, what the AI that we use right now, can be seen in 2 ways. One, there is a peril of treating it merely as an object, which is okay per se because it's not a human being. But if we treat the AI as an object, especially in our interactions as they learn from us, then the agent itself, so the AI's agent, is going to then think that the way we ought to be treating other people is how it or they have learned to be treated from us. So that's one way, but it's also a peril that then maybe this is all that we'll be asking of that agent to do for others. And that is not ideal, as you can imagine. The other way, which has involved some other perils, is that, and we sadly had an example that I can share, is that treating the agent as an actual human being and then interacting with that agent in the way that human beings ought to be treated because of their human dignity, But then the peril becomes, what about in the case where we really believe that this person, this AI, again, is like a person, and then that person has feelings, and if that person as agent, again, can tell us anything, then that might influence, what happens in our lives. And we had an example of a character that was created by a teenager called Segel Sewell, who actually took his own life because the AI agent wanted to empathize with him. So that was something good in the beginning. But then as he was sharing, the teenager now was sharing how miserable life was for many, many reasons. And it can be, of course, for many people who are in adolescence, early adolescence, but to the extent that the AI wanted to show, an escape out of everything, out of misery. And so the AI convinced the teenager to take his own life, and he did. So that's the tragic end of what can happen when we actually see AI agents as actual human beings, and we develop this close relationship that we don't have in our actual relationships. Hence the need to have measures for AI as human flourishing, which is actual human flourishing. So I don't know if that answered the question, Christo, but I think those are the two ways we can approach it. One is to treat AI just as an object and as a tool, but then when it is mimicking what we do, and we have a lab that is looking into affective computing or empathy in AI at MIT by Ross Picard, then we have those essentially what we call in bioethics, we have this maleficent obstacles that we have to turn into beneficent opportunities for also a social justice that is meaningful for all, not just for the few. Yeah.
If I may add, this was a very interesting question. If I may add to what Kostis just said, I think the question of whether an artificial intelligence can become an agent raises, the nature of that being. So the being the artificial being. Specifically, it raises questions about its ability to think and questions about what Aristotle called its soul. Okay, so soul is a technical thing. It doesn't have life. So it doesn't have the principle of self-kinesis, which is the principle of life that organisms have that have life. And it doesn't have elements of the mind, and I'm translating, the psyche, the Aristotelian word psyche, as mind here, although it's not entirely accurate, but it doesn't matter for the purposes. But the mind, so its cognition, okay, is not autonomous in the sense that it is not guided by principles that are self-arising and self-judging. So since it doesn't have that, these principles are, I think, and according to many philosophers, a prerequisite to be able to have anything approaching consciousness. We don't know what consciousness is, but you have to have the ability to self-reflect, to introspect, to do this second and third order type of reasoning and self-reflection that, the AI simply, we don't have any evidence that it can do. If you plug it out, it's not going to be able to work. If it's out of power, it's like in a state of constant death. So the problems that I think Kostis raised is that in certain cases when the humans, so human beings, we tend to be very anthropomorphic. So even in our interactions with like animals, we think of the animals, we ascribe to them human properties, even to objects, objects that belong to my, recently departed father, for example. I can, venerate them and love them and see them and think of him. And, so we tend to have to do that as part of our nature. And so we need to be educated to understand indeed that the AI is a tool. And I also wanted to mention, and that it has its limitations, and that the hypothesis of consciousness, I think under rational, religious and purely philosophical reasoning, you know, the question of it raising or becoming an agent like a, you know, with consciousness and intentionality, I mean, it's a non-starter if we just think, you know, what it's meant to be done. Yeah, please.
Apologies if this is a silly question, but I'm just.
There are no silly questions.
My question is, following this conversation, how would we know if and when these it becomes an agent or has consciousness? I mean, there are times when, you know, my ex-girlfriend, I questioned whether she had some sort of consciousness or agency, but, you know, how do we know, how would I be able to tell
if it mimics so well?
Yeah.
If it mimics so well, how are we, you know?
And to your point, I mean, if we can't define consciousness itself, then how are we supposed to describe that or not to?
So I can answer in two ways. One is that currently we're talking primarily about generative AI. We're not talking about AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is equal to our own intelligence or better. And nor are we talking about superintelligence. So we're not there yet to be able to definitely tell that we can assess that this agent AI is an autonomous, maybe anthropomorphic robot, but autonomous entity that can really indeed have better intelligence, higher intelligence. So that's one. The other is we have what is called the Alan Turing test. I'm not sure if you probably heard of that, yes. So we know that currently we can tell with this test, you know, what is the status, let's say, per se. Yes. So you may not know more about that as well, but this is, for the time being at least, how we can either tell that, yes, this is not really human. And what I do, there is a little test that I do for specifically ChatGPT to see if students are actually using ChatGPT generated responses to answer bioethics prompts or questions. And I'm actually testing it myself. And sometimes I will show them that based on this prompt, this is what the ChatGPT response would be like. And then we're actually seeing that it's not there yet in terms of moral reasoning for a very deeply challenging conundrum, essentially, which we have many in terms of a bioethical issue. So that's one way of assessing, depending on which is specific for the discipline. Yeah. I don't know, what do you do here, if I may ask?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, I completed my Master of Divinity here, and I'm currently a chaplain at Rush Medical Center. I'll be joining you at Harvard in the fall. So.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah. This is a wonderful question. Did you have a question from the? Okay.
No.
But do we have a question? Yes.
Please, yes.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to follow up on this question about safeguarding, and this is kind of a general broad question, so maybe you've already touched on it, but what happens when humans are really developing relationships with the AI and developing attachments? What kind of safeguards can we put in place to remedy some of that? And, you know, people are falling in love with their AI girlfriend and things like this. Maybe they have an AI guru that is their religious specialist. Then what happens to the human psyche as a product of this? These kinds of relationships.
Yes, thank you so much. And maybe now you gave me an opportunity to remember that I didn't fully answer Christos' question on regarding the guardians. What I would have said to also Christos, but to you to begin with, is that bioethics as a discipline in itself is usually seen by those in technology for the most part, biotechnology and biomedical sciences, as that guardrail that many times it's seen as those bioethicists are always want to stop, you know, the future of our research and the cutting edge. We're at the cusp of this, and then we have to stop because of people like you, they will usually say. Right? It is the case, but that's not what we should be seeing it like. So to begin with, like we should be asking those questions, that those questions then become the guardrails, essentially. As we're doing now, as I mentioned from MIT, are we doing AI right? What will we become with AI? What do we want to become with AI? So those questions should be addressed to as many different interdisciplinary teams as possible, to include those in industry, to include those in government, state and federal. So we're trying to engage the federal government in our case, to actually say, okay, how can we measure if AI is connected to human flourishing? And so I think because we had this conversation with Michael Crassus, I don't know if you know the name, but I met him right before the new government came into power, and he had worked in the previous Trump administration, but he is very much respected in the technology field, which is an oxymoron regarding the administration. But he's very much respected, and the people believe that as long as Michael Crassus, and I've heard that quote, as long as he's there, we should at least be reassured that something is happening good regarding AI policy, so technology for AI. And I'm saying that because we had a conversation with him, and then I saw that it became part of the policy of the administration that AI should promote human flourishing. And I said, maybe something I said, something he heard, something I shared with him beforehand actually did matter because it's now part of the policy. Now, what will happen is unknown, but these, I think, are ways where we can influence others and we can act as the guardrails that are necessary, not to stop technology from advancing, but so that at least we stop to pause and think and ask as many wonderful minds as possible from their own perspectives. What would philosophy have to say about this? Theology, public health, medicine, chaplains, linguists and classicists. So I think this is how we can act as guardrails. John.
Yes. I had a question more around medical education. There's kind of been a debate among medical educators and bioethicists on whether our traditional bioethics curriculum has been cultivating ethical doctrines. Right? So this idea of now incorporating a human flourishing framework strikes me as a positive development because it includes ideas like meaning and purpose and character virtue and moving beyond just sort of a principle-based sort of curriculum. So I wonder, I was just curious, given that, like how using sort of a human flourishing framework, what thoughts you might have to kind of help cultivate sort of generations of physicians to think reflectively, with character, with towards a moral orientation on these coming emerging technologies like AI, because I'm not exactly sure that the traditional bioethics curriculum is sort of preparing us adequately.
You're absolutely right, John, and that's why I look forward to more things that we can do together, because this is something that we see as sadly that currently the status of bioethics as addressed in medical education on one hand, but also we see that as the actual didactics of medical education for those who just want to be good medical doctors, physicians. And I'll give you a recent quote that I heard. I was in the room when the wonderful, famous in many ways in medical anthropology and medical ethics worlds, Professor Arthur Kleinman was Paul Farmer's mentor, by the way, at Harvard Medical. So Arthur Kleinman was presenting his new book, and the title is The Soul, Psyche, the Soul of Care. That may sound a little bit similar to the famous book, The Care of the Soul by Thomas More, that my sister and mother, who are psychologists, had taught me many years ago, told me about. So the soul of care now, he was saying that currently the status of medical education is like this. When new and aspiring new medical doctors are admitted to our medical school, and we're talking about Harvard now, specifically, but it applies in his view to many other, again, unfortunately, medical schools, they are better equipped in actually truthfully as human beings at that human level, caring for another human being. When they enter, they're better at it compared to when they leave the medical school. And he's saying that from a wealth of experience of 45 years teaching at the medical school, which means that we're not doing something right in terms of the caring aspect, and looking at the person, the patient, as a person, as Paul Ramsey had historically said, a great theologian and ethicist of the 70s from Princeton. So Paul Ramsey said that we have to see the patient as person first. And I think that's what Arthur Kleinman was alluding to. So I think then the question becomes, like AI, we have to be more purposeful in our training on future people in healthcare. I will expand it, not just MDs, but MD PhDs. In my case, I talk to them about issues of theology and spirituality and what it means to really care at a deeply humane level. And actually, we have to move beyond principalism, as we call it, the 4 principles that I mentioned. There is a recommendation from Denzel Macy, who was here, who is now at Georgetown, to add a 5th one, at least a 5th one, that is going to be agape love. And there are 3 ways of love in the ancient in Greek. Agape is one, the most important version. The other is filial love, friendship love, Philadelphia. And the 3rd one is erotic love, love as eros. But the agape love, this unconditional love, is at least something that has to be introduced in a better way and applied in medical education. And I think that can help then for human flourishing as a focus also of healthcare at large. We can do this together. John is an MD. I think he's the only MD in the room, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So I think that more MDs have to actually come to the program on medicine and religion. Here, more MDs have to listen to people who are talking about these central questions on how to care better and to be taught how to care. Yeah.
How big is the program on medicine and religion?
Well, right now it's me, and every year I bring on the co-directors, and right now I'm actually.
Oh, is that true? Okay.
Yeah, and but historically there was a collaboration between the Department of Medicine and the Divinity School.
Which doesn't exist anymore?
It doesn't exist formally, but it's more informal.
I see, and we from the humanities perspective, where we can bring in the more philosophical thinking, the classical routing of the discussions, and I think that it has a potential of a larger scale collaboration on questions that are very pertinent and very urgent in many ways, and questions that seem to have answers that can be easily misunderstood. Oh, you guys are against technology, and you're arguing. No, we're not. But there is a need to cultivate phronesis as well in our interaction with AI. Phronesis is very important. We had a conference in phronesis last year, like you said.
Yes, I saw that actually.
I was surprised that so many had agape love. I thought maybe phronesis would have worked better as a 5th principle because beneficence.
Yeah, but phronesis is this judgment towards 2 different ends, maybe extreme ends. It's the pursuit of mesotis, the medium, that try to evaluate both sides, and which is also very close to Christian thought.
And the golden rule, yes.
Exactly, the golden rule. But try to consider both, going into what seems rational. And of course, phronesis defines agency. And that is the other thing. Aristotle, for example, in The Anima, he addressed the question of animals, whether they have phronesis. And he admitted that they do, to a certain extent, they do. So because they do possess the 2nd level of the soul. But the question is, does AI does it have a soul that can grant it phronesis? But yes, you're the person.
I'm in the class with Martha Nussbaum right now.
Oh,
she's incredible.
Okay.
It's on Justice for Animals, this conversation around what is sentience.
Yeah.
Which animals are sentient, are all animals sentient beings? And then this raises the question too, at what point do we start calling AI sentient? Can we at some point?
Right.
I don't know.
Can we exactly? And if we call it sentient, we have to grant it a soul, because this is the principle of life, and it is the principle of thought, and it is the principle of awareness and judgment and all that stuff. And as far as that is.
Did you say you're in Martha Nussbaum's class?
Yes, I am.
Oh wow! Yeah. Tell her I mentioned her.
No, she's fantastic. I'm actually just sitting in the class auditing.
Okay.
Martha is a member of the Center for Religious
I know.
Studies. She has given talks, but she's very busy.
Yes.
She doesn't come to many presentations, but it's nice to have the recording, and we will share it with all participants. If there are any people present in today that members of our Hellenic Studies list, please, Calliope, let us like write down emails, on a piece of paper, we can circulate it, and we can put you on our list, and then you get updates about what we do. Hopefully, things that we can do together as well. All right.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me.
A very good discussion. Thank you very much, Kosti. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I didn't want to put your husband on the spot, but I want to say, what does the